The sound of gravel crunching under my boots should have been peaceful. Instead, it felt like walking across a minefield. The October air was thin and cold enough to sting the lungs, but what hit harder was her voice. Sharp, shrill, cutting through the trees like a warning siren. "Leave or I'll destroy it!" Those words didn't just echo, they detonated. I froze halfway to the cabin door, key still in my hand, heart hammering against ribs that had taken harder blows in uniform. I'd heard threats before, on foreign soil, over radio chatter behind courtroom doors, but never like this. Never standing on land that had been mine since before she even moved into this county. Her name was Karen Whitman, but everyone in Pine Lake called her HOA Karen. Mid-50s, Pilates polished, the kind of woman who weaponized smile lines and wielded power like a personal brand. She'd been president of the Pine Lake Homeowners Association for 2 years, long enough to convince herself she was mayor, judge, and sheriff rolled into one overpriced yoga mat. Before we move forward, comment down from where you're watching right now, because if you've ever lived under an HOA, you already know what comes next. The illusion of power meeting the wall of actual law. And trust me, this wall doesn't bend. The morning had started as silence. The lake still mirrored the gray sky, birds cutting across reflections of pine and mist. I'd come up to the cabin to close it for the season, drain the pipes, check the roof line, lock the door like my grandfather used to. He built this place in 1952 after coming home from Korea. Hand-cut beams, fieldstone foundation, filed every permit with Clearwater County before a single nail went in. My father inherited it, then me. It wasn't a summer toy. It was a bloodline written in cedar. I'd barely turned the key when I heard the rustle in the woods, the sound of boots that had never touched mud before today. HOA Karen emerged like a theater villain entering stage right. Expensive parka, clipboard, and that posture that said she expected the world to salute. "Mr. Steele," she called out, her tone already half reprimand, half performance. "You're violating community standards again." I blinked. "By locking my own door?" Her expression tightened. "By maintaining an unauthorized structure. The board has determined this cabin doesn't comply with architectural harmony standards or current safety codes." "Architectural harmony? That's HOA speak, for we don't like that you exist outside our control." I let her talk while I reached into the truck and pulled out the old green ammunition box. The metal was dented, paint chipped, but the latches still snapped shut like they did 70 years ago. Inside lay the truth. Deeds, permits, surveys, each document laminated against time and ignorance. "This property predates your HOA by 35 years, I said evenly, filed legally with the county. "Clerk's office. You can't rewrite history because you found a new shade of beige paint." She laughed, one of those brittle laughs that covers rage. "Mr. Steele, perhaps you misunderstand how authority works around here." That line did it. The words around here always mean under me. "I've spent half my life teaching federal contractors what authority really means," I told her. "It comes with jurisdiction, not ego." Her eyes narrowed. "I'll call the sheriff." "Please do." She blinked, thrown by the lack of fear. "You're trespassing on association land." I turned the key deliberately, letting each metallic click punctuate the space between us. "Association land ends at the Birch line. County Plat says so. Section 18, Plot 15. I suggest you check it." She raised her phone, thumb already hovering over the dial like a trigger. "Then we'll let law enforcement decide." What she didn't realize was that she'd just made her first tactical error. Because when someone like HOA Karen invites the law into a fight built on fiction, the truth tends to show up wearing a badge. Her call carried across the clearing, every syllable dripping with false urgency. Sheriff Johnson, this is Karen Whitman, Pine Lake HOA president. We have a situation requiring immediate attention. A property owner is refusing compliance and may be trespassing. She threw a glance at me between phrases, as if daring me to interrupt. I didn't. I just lifted my phone and started recording. 15 years of field inspections and government contracting had taught me a single rule: documentation wins wars. By the time she hung up, I could already hear the faint echo of sirens bouncing off the lake. That's when her smirk returned. Cold, satisfied, the kind that feeds on imagined victory. You really should have cooperated, Mr. Steele. Sheriff Johnson takes property violations seriously. Good, I said. So do I. The patrol car appeared minutes later, tires grinding through gravel, lights flickering against the trees. Out stepped Sheriff Johnson, a man built from local soil and long patience. I'd seen him once or twice in town. He wasn't the kind who liked drama before lunch. Morning, he said, voice neutral. What's going on? Karen launched into her monologue like a prosecutor on caffeine, waving papers, pointing at the cabin, invoking bylaws as if reciting scripture. I watched Johnson's eyes. They weren't following her gestures. They were tracking details, the foundation stonework, the aged permits still mounted by the doorframe, the ammo box at my feet. When she paused for breath, he asked quietly, Mr. Steele, you got documentation for this place? Without a word, I handed him the originals, county stamps, signatures older than both of us combined. He studied them carefully, then looked back at Karen. This cabin was built in '52, he said. Your association incorporated in '87. Unless I'm missing something, this property's outside your jurisdiction. Her face drained of color. But the amended community map, amended maps don't override recorded deeds, ma'am. His tone stayed calm, but I caught the edge beneath it. You got evidence of code violations? Safety hazards? She hesitated. Non-compliance with aesthetic uniformity. Johnson blinked slowly. That's not a safety hazard. That's an opinion. For a moment, silence hung heavy enough to snap. The only sound was the lake lapping against the rocks. Well, he finally said, closing the folder, looks like a civil matter to me. Folks, I suggest you handle this through proper channels. Then he handed the documents back to me and tipped his hat. Good day. Karen stood there, her authority leaking out of her like air from a punctured tire. She opened her mouth, shut it, then muttered the inevitable fallback of the cornered. This isn't over. No, I said, sliding the ammo box into the truck. It's just starting. She left in a storm of perfume and gravel dust, and I sat in the driver's seat for a long minute, letting the engine idle. 47 minutes of audio recording blinked on my phone screen, her voice, her threats, her fabricated claims, all preserved in crystal clarity. The evidence was perfect. But it wasn't just evidence of one tantrum. It was a blueprint, a map of how false power collapses the second it meets real authority. I looked at the cabin, cedar walls silvered by time, window glass catching the low sun, and thought of my grandfather's handwriting on those old permits. He'd believed in systems, in doing things right. He used to say, "Paperwork's the armor of honest men." Now I understood what he meant. Tomorrow I'd start the calls, to the county clerk, to a lawyer who specialized in property rights, maybe to the local paper if it came to that. Karen had declared war, but she'd made the mistake of firing the first shot on ground I owned, legally and morally. As I backed the truck down the drive, I caught a glimpse of her through the trees on her phone again, pacing, voice sharp even from a distance. She thought she was reasserting control. She was actually documenting her own downfall. The lake wind shifted, carrying the smell of pine and something colder. The scent of change. For the first time all morning, I smiled. She thought she'd written the ending. She hadn't even seen the second act. Because the moment she called the cops, she turned this from a neighborhood dispute into a matter of record. And paper records have a way of outlasting people who fake authority. Tomorrow I'd start with the county courthouse. By the end of the week, I'd have everything filed under my name again. And when the next siren came, it wouldn't be coming for me. It'd be coming for her. The drive back to town was a blur of pines and asphalt. Every turn of the wheel replayed her words. Leave or I'll destroy it. I'd heard worse in war zones, but somehow this one felt personal. Maybe because it wasn't about fear, it was about legacy. My family didn't build that cabin for profit or prestige. It was built as proof that hard work and lawful ownership meant something. It was the kind of place where every nail had a purpose, and every board held a story. You could smell history in the cedar when you stepped inside. To watch someone like HOA Karen threaten it with paperwork and arrogance wasn't just insulting, it was heresy. I stopped at the diner off County Road 9, the kind with coffee that tastes like gun oil and regulars who know more law than half the attorneys downtown. Betty, the waitress, slid me a mug before I even sat down. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Robert." "Not a ghost," I said, taking a sip. "A bureaucrat with a god complex." She laughed the kind of laugh people use when they think you're joking but hope you're not. "You mean that woman from the association? She's been making trouble since spring. Filed complaints about fishing docks, fire pits, even lawn chairs. Acts like she runs the county." "She'll find out what running the county actually looks like," I said quietly. Because the truth was, I knew more about law and authority than she ever would. My background wasn't a secret. It just wasn't something I liked talking about. I'd served 12 years as an engineering inspector for the Department of Defense, 5 of those overseas. My unit's job was to evaluate private contractors for compliance, structural integrity, environmental safety, regulatory adherence. We'd walked into construction zones built by men who thought they could cheat the system and leave it buried under red tape. They learned quick that paper trails are more dangerous than bullets. You can dodge one, you can't outrun the other. When I came home, I switched to federal contracting, civil infrastructure projects, compliance audits, site validations. I'd spent years learning what made authority real and what made it theater. The HOA? That was theater. No jurisdiction, no chain of command, no actual power, just fear dressed in a blazer. And people believed it because they were too busy to read the fine print. I wasn't too busy. I was the fine print. That cabin wasn't just wood and stone. It was a field manual in my bloodline. My grandfather, Edward Steele, built it the year he came home from Korea. He'd been a marine engineer, too. The man treated code books like scripture. He filed permits before he poured foundation, double-stamped survey maps, and kept every document in that ammunition box like it was a weapon. He used to say, "If you do it right once, they can't touch you later." When he passed, my father kept that rule alive. And when my father's health failed, he handed it all to me with one simple promise. Never let anyone erase our name from that land. So when Karen Whitman tried to tell me that my cabin violated her association's aesthetic guidelines, she wasn't just challenging a man. She was challenging 3 generations of lawful craftsmanship. I wasn't the kind of neighbor who fought about grass height or mailboxes. But I was the kind who would fight over legal rights written in black ink on county paper. As I sat in that diner, the hum of conversation faded beneath the hum of resolve. I pulled out the old documents again, spreading them on the counter like a general reviewing a battle map. There it was. County Seal of Clearwater, dated March 4th, 1952, permit number 371B, structure authorization, signed County Engineer William Morrison. Below that, a property plat with coordinates drawn by hand, stamped approved and filed. That was the difference between opinion and law. Karen had neither. A few booths down, Sheriff Johnson's deputy walked in for lunch. He nodded toward me. "Heard about the situation up at the lake, Mr. Steele. Johnson said you handled yourself right." "Appreciate it," I said. "She's gonna keep pushing." "Yeah," he sighed. "She's been on the phone all morning. Said something about redefining jurisdiction." I smiled without humor. "That's not how maps work." The deputy chuckled, tipping his hat before heading to the counter. "Guess she's about to find that out." By the time I finished my second cup of coffee, I had my plan. Step 1. Visit the courthouse. Step 2. File a request for certified copies of every deed and survey tied to that land. Step 3. Prepare for war, not with rage, but with precision. Because if there's one thing people like HOA Karen don't understand, it's that calm is a tactical advantage. Anger's noisy. Calm is lethal. The courthouse in Clearwater smelled like old paper and authority. The clerk, a woman who looked like she'd been cataloging documents since before computers existed, squinted over her glasses as I handed her my grandfather's originals. "These are museum pieces," she said, flipping through the yellowed pages. "Haven't seen stamps like this since the Eisenhower administration." "Can you verify the filing?" I asked. "Sure can." She typed for a minute, then smiled. "Filed and recorded March 7th, 1952. Active and unamended. You're good, Mr. Steele." That single word, unamended, was a bullet straight through Karen's argument. On my way out, I asked, "Can you tell me when the Pine Lake HOA was incorporated?" She clicked a few keys, then printed a single page. 1987. Small group of residents. You're outside their boundary, always have been. I folded the printout and slid it into my jacket pocket. That sound, the crisp slide of paper against fabric, felt like locking a magazine into place. Back at the cabin, I stood at the tree line, looking across the water toward Karen's house. It was big, modern, built from the kind of money that thinks rules are decorations. Her flag waved proudly from a manicured lawn that had never known real dirt. You could almost see the entitlement from here. I wondered how many people she'd bullied into silence, how many neighbors had paid her assessment fees just to be left alone. But silence is permission. I'd learned that in Afghanistan. You don't let tyranny grow roots in the quiet. You cut it before it spreads. I spent the afternoon scanning my documents, creating backups, labeling each by date and legal reference. Permit 371B, Survey 1952 Morrison, Ownership Transfer, 1978, Steele Senior Notarized, County Verification 2024. Each file saved under 3 separate drives. The system wasn't just meticulous. It was built for trial readiness. If she wanted a fight in court, I'd make sure it came with exhibits, timestamps, and cross-referenced case law. That night, sitting by the cabin's stone fireplace, I thought about my father's last visit here before his health failed. He'd sat in the same chair, coffee in one hand, folded newspaper in the other. "You know," he'd said, "it's not the loud ones that scare me. It's the ones who think they're right because no one ever told them they're wrong." He'd been right. HOA Karen wasn't evil. She was something worse. Certain. Certain that her little title gave her dominion over everyone else. Certain that intimidation was governance. Certain that she'd never meet someone who spoke the same language of law, only louder. The next morning, I printed everything and made copies for a lawyer I knew from my federal days. Her name was Catherine Bennett, one of those rare attorneys who understood that paperwork isn't just paper. It's armor. We'd worked together on a construction compliance case years ago, where a contractor tried to forge permits. She'd shredded him in court so completely, he changed professions. If anyone could dismantle an HOA tyrant, it was her. I left her a voicemail. "Catherine, it's Steele. Got a property issue up at Pine Lake. You'll want to hear this one. Call me back." Then I headed to the post office to send certified requests for all HOA incorporation documents. The clerk raised an eyebrow at the stack of forms. "You planning a takeover?" "Something like that," I said. By noon, I was back at the cabin tightening shutters and checking locks, every movement deliberate, every sound of metal on wood a reminder that this was mine. The phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. "This is Catherine," the voice said. "I got your message. What did they do?" I told her everything, from the first confrontation to the sheriff's visit to the fake authority act. She didn't interrupt, just listened. When I finished, she said quietly, "You're sitting on a perfect case. That cabin predates their jurisdiction. If she keeps pushing, it moves from civil violation to fraud under color of law." "Fraud," I repeated. "Absolutely. If she's collecting money or enforcing restrictions without legal standing, that's extortion. If she's altering maps or documents, it's forgery. You've got leverage, Robert. Real leverage. Don't just defend, counterattack." The line went silent for a beat. Then she added, "And record everything. Every threat, every visit, every letter." Already done. When I hung up, I looked out at the lake. The sun caught the ripples, turning them into thin lines of light like signatures written by nature itself. My grandfather's words echoed in my head again. "Do it right once. They can't touch you later." Karen Whitman had made a mistake. She picked a fight with a man who lived by documentation, not opinion. She thought she was policing a community. She was about to learn what happens when you trespass into federal-grade precision. By evening, the house was dark, except for the glow of my laptop screen reflecting off the window. My inbox filled with county confirmations, certified timestamps, and scanned records. One message from Catherine stood out. "Tomorrow, I'll send you a list of statutes. We'll build this by the book. She called the cops once. Next time, she'll call her lawyer." Outside, wind whistled through the trees, the same sound my grandfather must have heard 70 years ago. But where he heard peace, I heard preparation. The war hadn't started yet, but it would. And this time, it wouldn't be fought with noise. It would be fought with proof. By Tuesday morning, Pine Lake had turned into something it hadn't been in decades. A rumor factory. The story spread faster than wildfire in dry grass, the outsider who stood up to the HOA president. At the general store, I could feel eyes on me. Not hostile, just curious. People whispered near the counter, glancing at me like they were watching a movie unfold in real time. Everyone in that town knew who Karen Whitman was, but no one had ever stood up to her and walked away without paying a price. Karen ran the HOA like a private government. She wasn't elected, not really. The last election had been a voice vote in a half-empty meeting 5 years ago. She'd rewritten the bylaws afterward, turning her temporary position into an indefinite reign. Her inner circle was made up of people too timid to challenge her, or too invested in her control to care. The HOA's power wasn't written in law. It was enforced through fear, reputation, and the slow suffocation of bureaucracy. She started small, as they always do. A suggestion about mailbox uniformity became a mandatory order. Voluntary community fees became required payments. People complied because it was easier than fighting. But the more they yielded, the more she took. The HOA had begun as a maintenance committee and mutated into a regime. That afternoon, I drove past her house to test something. The place stood on the far bend of the lake, a modern fortress of glass and steel, pretending to be rustic. It was the kind of home that looked like it was designed for a magazine spread, not a human being. A black Range Rover sat in the driveway, its paint so polished it reflected the trees. 2 security cameras followed me as I passed, turning in perfect synchronization. She'd invested in surveillance like a dictator guarding a throne. I wasn't surprised when my phone buzzed an hour later. Unknown number, but I didn't need caller ID. Her tone was already there. Sharp, practiced, fake polite. "Mr. Steele," she began, "I wanted to extend an opportunity to resolve our misunderstanding amicably." I didn't respond. Silence has weight. Letting someone like her fill it is how you learn their motives. She continued, her voice dripping with sugar that couldn't mask the venom. "You see, the Pine Lake community has certain expectations for property upkeep, and your cabin, while I'm sure it's dear to you, doesn't align with the aesthetic standards outlined in our revised charter. However, I believe a compromise can be reached." "There's nothing to compromise," I said flatly. "My property predates your charter." Her tone hardened instantly. "That's your interpretation, Mr. Steele, but our board's legal counsel believes otherwise." "Your board's legal counsel," I repeated. "Not the county's, not the state's." There was a pause, the kind that signals calculation. "I hope you understand how unpleasant this can become if you insist on challenging the board. Property lines, code reviews, insurance reports, it's all very tedious but quite effective." There it was. The real HOA weapon wasn't authority. It was exhaustion. She'd bury you in letters, inspections, hearings until you gave up or moved out. "Try it," I said, and ended the call. For a long moment I stared at the phone, feeling the familiar burn of anger rise and then level into focus. This wasn't going to be a single confrontation. This was going to be a campaign. That evening, I started digging into public records. What I found was worse than I expected. Karen's name was attached to 6 prior special assessments levied on homeowners across Pine Lake, some as high as $15,000, others disguised as community improvement fees. Every one of those cases ended the same way. The homeowners paid under threat of fines or litigation. No one had ever verified the legal basis. Then I found something else. Meeting minutes from 2020 listing Karen as both board chair and acting treasurer. That's not just unethical. It's illegal under HOA governance law. Dual control of funds without independent oversight was a red flag big enough to see from orbit. The more I dug, the clearer the pattern became. She'd been using the HOA like a personal bank. Assessments collected for park maintenance had been funneled into an account labeled Special Projects. Payments to contractors had no matching invoices. Vendors listed on receipts didn't exist. She wasn't just corrupt, she was sloppy. I printed everything. 47 pages of financial irregularities, fraudulent filings, and procedural violations. Each sheet was a nail in the coffin of her manufactured empire. But what caught my attention most wasn't the money. It was a letter buried in the digital archives, sent to the county zoning department 3 months ago. Signed, Karen Whitman, HOA President. The letter requested boundary clarifications for Pine Lake's jurisdiction, specifically the inclusion of 3 lots that had historically fallen outside the HOA's legal map. One of them was mine. She'd tried to expand her reach retroactively, banking on the assumption that nobody would check. She'd filed a fake map and gotten away with it because no one cared enough to look. Until now. I sent everything to Catherine Bennett with one line in the email. "She's manufacturing authority. Let's dismantle it." By morning, Catherine called. "Robert, this isn't just civil fraud. This is criminal exposure if we play it right. She forged jurisdictional documents. That's falsification of public records under state law. If she's been collecting money from properties outside her legal boundary, that's wire fraud and extortion. You're not just going to win, you're going to burn her playbook." "Then let's start the fire," I said. Catherine promised to start the filings for a discovery motion to subpoena HOA financial records. She'd also contact the county attorney's office to flag the boundary discrepancy. That meant Karen's fake map would soon be in the hands of people who actually enforce the law. Meanwhile, I went door to door. Quietly. Carefully. I started with the families listed in the assessments. The Pattersons on Lot 47. Elderly couple, paid $18,000 last year to keep their gazebo. The Johnsons on Lot 52 had to tear down a workshop they'd built in the 70s after Karen threatened legal action. The Millers on Lot 68, still fighting over a storage shed. Every story was the same. Letters, threats, legal jargon, fear. People had sold valuables, drained savings, or gone into debt to comply. None of them had checked the law. They just trusted the HOA's authority. When I told them the truth, that Karen had no jurisdiction over their properties, the silence was heavier than disbelief. It was the sound of people realizing they'd been conned. Mrs. Patterson, her hands shaking, whispered, "You mean we didn't have to pay her?" "No, ma'am," I said. "And you won't again." The change that passed over that room was palpable. Fear turned into fury. By the time I left the Miller's driveway, the group chat had already begun. One homeowner messaged another, then another. The network spread overnight. Text messages, emails, phone calls. People who hadn't spoken to each other in years started comparing notes. HOA Karen's walls of control were cracking from the inside. On Thursday, I drove past the Pine Lake Community Center. The parking lot was empty, but the building itself stood like a relic of bad intentions. Flyers on the door announced the upcoming compliance review meeting. I peeled one off the wall and smiled. It was signed by Karen herself, complete with the same fake jurisdiction header I'd seen in the forged documents. By evening, Catherine sent an update. She'd filed the preliminary notice with the county and scheduled a consultation with the State Fraud Division. "Once they pull her financials," she said, "the dominoes will fall." Still, I knew Karen wouldn't go down quietly. People like her never do. They confuse exposure with persecution. In their minds, being caught is just proof of how special they are. Sure enough, that night, as rain hammered the cabin roof, I got an email from her official HOA address. The subject line read, "Final notice. Unauthorized structure pending enforcement." The message was short but explosive. "Mr. Steele, your continued occupation of the Pine Lake property constitutes an active violation of Article 7, Section 3 of the Community Charter. You are hereby notified that failure to comply with demolition orders may result in the HOA taking corrective measures directly. Karen Whitman, Board Chair." That was it. The line crossed, the threat made. She'd just given me written evidence of intent to destroy private property. I forwarded the email to Catherine. Her reply came 3 minutes later. "This is gold. Screenshot it, archive it, and back it up. She just handed us criminal intent." I leaned back in my chair and stared out into the storm. Lightning cracked over the lake, illuminating the water like a strobe. Somewhere across that darkness sat Karen's mansion, glowing warm and smug, unaware that the clock was already ticking down on her empire. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have imagined, was that she'd picked a fight with the one man in this county who could dismantle her authority not with rage, but with paperwork. She could call cops, call lawyers, call every favor she had, but she couldn't call off the truth. Because the truth doesn't need permission to exist. And when it arrives, it doesn't knock. It kicks the damn door in. The storm didn't let up that night. The rain sounded like static against the cabin's roof, a steady hiss that masked everything but thought. I didn't sleep much. My mind worked in loops, laws, boundaries, records. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Karen's email again, the line that said, "corrective measures." That phrase wasn't just arrogance, it was evidence. I'd learned to read between words the same way a sniper reads wind, precision decides outcomes. By morning, the world had turned silver and cold. Mist hung over the lake like smoke from a dying fire. I brewed coffee on the old gas stove, the same one my grandfather used, and opened my laptop. Catherine had already sent 3 new messages overnight, each with attachments labeled Discovery Packet AC. When I opened them, my pulse kicked up. It was everything we needed: state statutes, case precedents, procedural templates. She'd mapped the battlefield with surgical accuracy. The first file was a breakdown of fraud under color of law, the statute that applied when someone used a false claim of authority to extract money or compliance. Section 134 of the State Criminal Code. It was clear as daylight. If Karen or the HOA had collected fees or issued threats under false jurisdiction, they'd committed a felony. The second document listed federal statutes, 18 U.S.C., paragraph 1343, wire fraud, paragraph 1346, deprivation of honest services. Each one came with penalty ranges that could put a board member in front of a judge for years. The third file was a draft subpoena template for financial disclosure. All that remained was proof of collection, and we had that in the homeowner's bank statements and receipts. I sent her a message. If we get county verification of her falsified map, does this go federal? Her reply came quick. It will. Once jurisdictional fraud crosses property lines and involves digital correspondence, it qualifies as interstate communication. That means FBI or state attorney jurisdiction. We'll go wherever it hits hardest. The rain stopped by mid-morning. I locked up the cabin and drove straight to the county courthouse again, this time with a mission. The same clerk was there, glasses low on her nose, fingers tapping the keyboard. She smiled when she saw me. Back again, Mr. Steele? Yes, ma'am. I need the official boundary map for Pine Lake as recorded in 1987, and any amended filing since. She turned to the cabinet behind her, fingers trailing through folders older than most of the town's residents. Here we go. She spread 2 maps side by side on the counter. One yellowed with age, labeled Original HOA Incorporation, 1987. The other, newer, dated 2003. The differences were subtle, but devastating. The 1987 map clearly ended at the Pine Break, the natural boundary that split Karen's subdivision from my family's land. The 2003 version extended that line by about 80 yards, right over my cabin. Who filed this amendment? I asked. She squinted at the signature block. Says K. Whitman, board representative. That was it. The signature, the date, the intent, all in black ink. Was it notarized? I asked. No. She checked the lower corner. Looks like it was submitted but never certified. There's no county seal, no authorization stamp. I could almost feel the grin spreading. She hadn't just lied, she'd forged. Can I get certified copies of both versions? Absolutely. The printer began humming. As the clerk fed the pages through the seal press, that sound, the heavy click of validation, felt like a verdict being handed down. When she slid the documents toward me, I looked at them side by side. One legal, one fake, 2 realities colliding on paper. Ma'am, I said, you might have just saved a lot of people's money. She smiled faintly. Always nice when paperwork bites back. Back in my truck, I sent high-resolution scans to Catherine along with a voice note. Confirmed forged map, submitted 2003 by Karen Whitman, no county certification, sending originals overnight. Her reply came 30 seconds later. That's game over. Once we file this with the district attorney, she's cooked. You just turned her authority into evidence. The rest of the day was a blur of motion. Calls, documents, meetings. Catherine looped in a contact from the county attorney's office, a man named Richard Hale. He specialized in property law enforcement and fraud recovery. We scheduled a meeting for Friday morning at the courthouse. That night, I stayed at the cabin again. There was a certain poetic symmetry in working from the place she wanted to erase. I laid the 2 maps out on the dining table under the glow of a single lamp. My grandfather's old magnifier sat next to them, glass slightly chipped at the edge. When I lined the maps perfectly, the forgery stood out like a scar. The added boundary line wasn't even drawn to scale. It curved unnaturally, slicing across the original topography like someone guessed where property should end. Sloppy, desperate, and incriminating. I took photos from every angle, time-stamped, backed up, and printed duplicates. Evidence didn't matter unless it existed in triplicate. I'd learned that the hard way, inspecting contractors overseas who'd falsified blueprints to save money. They always underestimated one thing: the person who still believed in doing things by the book. Around midnight, I heard a noise outside, a faint crunch of gravel, deliberate, measured. I turned off the lamp and moved to the window. A flashlight beam swept across the cabin's porch, lingering on the lock, then the window frame. My hand went to the holster on my belt out of instinct, but I didn't draw. I just waited. The light held steady for another few seconds, then vanished. Tires rolled softly over the dirt road, receding into the night. I didn't have to guess who it was. Karen's paranoia would be reaching fever pitch by now. She'd sense control slipping and try to reassert it through intimidation. But intimidation only works on the uninformed. I wasn't that. By morning, I had security cameras installed, motion-triggered, cloud-backed, hidden under the eaves. Every entrance was covered, every angle recorded. The footage would serve 2 purposes: proof of harassment and insurance documentation. Friday came cold and sharp, the air smelling of wet pine and ozone. Catherine met me at the courthouse, her hair tied back, coat folded over. Her arm, a folder clutched in her hand. "You ready to end this?" she asked. "Been ready since she called the cops." Richard Hale met us inside. Gray suit, clean glasses, the kind of man who sees more evidence than emotion. I laid the forged and original maps on his desk. He studied them silently for several minutes. Then he exhaled, long and slow. "This is bad," he said. "And not for you." He picked up the 2003 version, pointing to the missing seals. "Submitting an unverified map to claim jurisdiction over private land. Yeah, that's falsification of public records, punishable by up to 5 years under state law. If she used it to collect fees, we're talking about restitution and fraud charges." Catherine smiled faintly. "Then we proceed?" "Oh, we proceed," Hale said. "I'll open an investigation under the property division and loop in the district attorney's fraud unit. Mr. Steele, keep your documentation secure. This could escalate fast once she gets wind of it." That evening, I drove back to Pine Lake, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. But when I pulled into the gravel drive, I noticed something wrong. The cabin's door was ajar. My stomach dropped. I cut the engine and stepped out slowly. The lock hung twisted, splintered wood around it. Someone had forced it open. Inside, drawers were open, papers scattered across the floor, chairs overturned. But nothing was taken. The old ammo box still sat where I'd left it, untouched. It wasn't a robbery. It was a message. I walked to the kitchen and found it scrawled across the window in thick black marker. "You should have left when you could." The handwriting was neat, deliberate, the same way she signed her HOA letters. I took a photo, time-stamped it, and called Catherine. "Don't touch anything," she said. "I'll call Hale. We'll have a deputy there in 30 minutes." When the sheriff's car pulled up, the same man who'd answered her first false call stepped out. His expression shifted from suspicion to quiet disgust as he saw the writing. "You know who did this?" "I have a guess," I said. He nodded. We'll take prints. But between you and me, I've seen this kind of thing before. People who lose control tend to lash out before they crumble. Keep your doors locked. And if she shows up again, don't engage. Just call us." That night, as the deputies packed up, the weight of it all sank in. She'd crossed from manipulation into criminality. There was no coming back from that. The evidence was no longer just paper. It was behavior, patterned, escalating, undeniable. The next morning, Catherine called with the update I'd been waiting for. "The county attorney filed the fraud petition this morning. The state's property division has accepted the case for review. They'll issue a cease-and-desist order against the HOA pending investigation." I stared out at the lake, the reflection of sunrise breaking through clouds, and finally felt it. A shift. The kind that starts slow but becomes unstoppable. Karen had built her power on bluff and intimidation. But those crumble the second the real system starts paying attention. She could still bluff her way through meetings. She could still threaten homeowners who didn't know the law, but she couldn't bluff the state. Not anymore. By noon, a courier truck rolled into my drive with an envelope from Catherine. Inside was a copy of the county's official acknowledgement of fraud investigation. I read it twice. Every word felt like vindication carved in ink. For the first time since that confrontation on the porch, I knew this fight had an ending. And it wouldn't be hers. I folded the letter and placed it back into the ammo box beside my grandfather's deeds. Legacy protecting legacy. Proof stacked atop proof. What Karen didn't understand, and what she'd never understand, was that authority isn't declared. It's earned. She could call herself president of a lake all she wanted, but the real power had always been written in black and white, signed, sealed, and certified decades before her reign began. And now, those same papers she mocked would become the very things that dismantled her. The cease-and-desist order hit Pine Lake like thunder on glass. By the next afternoon, every homeowner had a copy slipped under their door. The HOA was under investigation for jurisdictional fraud, all collection activity suspended, and all enforcement actions frozen pending state review. The paper carried the county seal, heavy and undeniable. Karen's empire didn't collapse quietly. It groaned, splintered, and then screamed. I was at the cabin porch when her Range Rover tore down the dirt road, throwing gravel like shrapnel. She didn't even cut the engine before leaping out, phone in one hand, a stack of papers in the other. Her voice, once smooth and commanding, now broke at the edges. "You think you can humiliate me?" she spat. "You think you can destroy everything I built?" I didn't move. I kept my hands visible, calm, steady, like a soldier waiting out an ambush. "You built it on fraud, Karen." She jabbed the phone toward me. "You and your little lawyer have no idea who you're dealing with. I have friends in the county office. I have friends in the press. I can ruin you before you blink." "Maybe," I said. "But while you're calling friends, the state attorney's already calling the fraud division." Her face twisted. "You did this." "No," I said. "You did. I just turned the lights on." For a moment she stood there, shaking, papers trembling in her hand, rain misting across her perfect hair. Then she tore the cease-and-desist notice in half and let the pieces fall into the mud. "You don't deserve that land. People like you never do." The arrogance in that last line almost made me laugh. People like me, the ones who worked, built, filed, and followed the law, were the only reason she had a system to exploit. "You should go home," I said quietly, "before this gets worse." She got back into her car, slamming the door so hard the sound echoed off the trees and sped away. But I knew that wasn't the end. People like Karen don't retreat. They reload. That evening, the first wave hit. Anonymous posts flooded the Pine Lake community page. Claims that I was hostile, that I'd threatened board members, that I'd forged old documents. Classic smear campaign, textbook manipulation. The timing wasn't coincidence. She was spinning narrative before the investigation took shape. I saved screenshots of every word. By dawn, my phone started buzzing with messages from residents I'd spoken to earlier in the week. Most were angry, at her, not me. They'd seen the order themselves. They knew the state wouldn't suspend an HOA without evidence. The narrative was cracking. Around noon, I received a call from Catherine. "You're trending locally," she said, voice half amused, half annoyed. "The Pine County Gazette just published a story on the investigation. They quoted Hale. He confirmed forged documents were discovered. Then it's public now." "Exactly," she said. "And that means we're in the escalation phase. She's going to panic." I didn't have to wait long to see it. That afternoon, as I was stacking wood by the shed, 2 county inspectors arrived, followed by a white SUV with the HOA logo. Karen stepped out, flanked by 2 men I didn't recognize, both in cheap suits, both carrying clipboards like props. "Mr. Steele?" one of them began formally. "We're here to perform a safety inspection under Community Code section." I cut him off. "Community Code doesn't apply here. You're trespassing on private property under active county investigation." I handed him a copy of the cease-and-desist order. His lips moved as he read, color draining from his face. Karen snatched the paper from his hand and ripped it in half again. "You can't stop an inspection," she snapped. "You're right," I said evenly, "but the county attorney can." And he did. I turned to the inspectors. "Gentlemen, I suggest you leave before you become part of her legal problem." They hesitated, glancing at each other, then at Karen. The older one cleared his throat. "Ma'am, with respect, this order supersedes our authority." Her face went red, the kind of red that makes veins stand out. "Get back in the car," she hissed. When they drove away, she stayed, pacing like a caged thing. "You think you've won," she said softly. "You think paperwork makes you untouchable." "It's not paperwork," I said. "It's law." She stared at me with a hatred so pure it almost looked holy. Then she said something I'll never forget. "Everyone bends eventually." She left without another word, but I knew she wasn't done. That night, I sat by the fire, recording every detail of the day in a notebook. I logged times, vehicles, license plates, dialogue, every word preserved. The camera footage backed it all up. By the time I finished, my notes read like a timeline for a prosecution file. Saturday morning, the storm broke. Not weather, but public reaction. Local news had picked up the Gazette story. Headlines read, "HOA under fraud probe for fake jurisdiction. President named in investigation." Her name was out there, her title beside it, and suddenly the fear that once kept everyone quiet had turned into outrage. Comments flooded the Gazette's website. Residents shared stories, photos of notices, receipts, even emails. The HOA's own digital record became the prosecution's gold mine. Catherine called again, voice crackling with restrained energy. "The DA's office wants statements from the homeowners. You've got about 20 families ready to testify, right?" "More," I said. "They've been calling non-stop." "Good. Keep them organized. Once the subpoenas go out, she'll have nowhere to hide." That afternoon, the sheriff returned. Not the deputy this time, but Johnson himself. His cruiser rolled slow up the drive. He got out, adjusted his hat, and said, "You've stirred up quite the hornet's nest, Mr. Steele." "I didn't stir it," I said. "I just stopped pretending not to see it." He smirked. "Fair enough. County got word she's been trying to file restraining orders against half the town. Judge refused to sign any of them. Her reputation's tanking fast. Thought you should know." "Appreciate the update." He paused, lowering his voice. "Between us, she called the sheriff's office twice today. claimed you were threatening her. We've got body cam footage from both times showing she was never in danger. She's spiraling. Just keep yourself steady." "I'm steady," I said. "Good. Keep recording everything. She'll trip over her own lies soon enough." He left me standing on the porch with the faint hum of truth in my ears. That hum grew louder over the next week as the state investigation deepened. They froze the HOA's bank accounts, subpoenaed records, and interviewed every board member. Half of them resigned on the spot. The treasurer cried during questioning. The secretary confessed to signing documents she never read. Karen's carefully polished control disintegrated. Each lie she'd built her identity on began collapsing in sequence. The final straw came 10 days after the first cease and desist. The county auditor released preliminary findings: over $87,000 in unaccounted funds labeled as special assessments. Of that, nearly $60,000 had been transferred to a personal account under her name. When the report hit the news, Pine Lake erupted. Neighbors who once smiled politely now turned their backs on her in the grocery store. Residents gathered at the community center demanding refunds, accountability, and resignation. Someone recorded her meltdown at that meeting and posted it online. The clip went viral in less than 24 hours. I watched it alone in the cabin, laptop balanced on my knees. The video started with her standing at the podium, voice shaking as she tried to regain authority. "This community wouldn't exist without my leadership," she shouted. "Everything I did was for your benefit." But the crowd wasn't buying it. Shouts of fraud and "where's the money?" drowned her out. At one point, she slammed her binder shut and yelled, "You're all ungrateful," before storming out. The comment section turned brutal. People compared her to dictators and scam artists. Memes flooded social media. She'd spent years building fear. Now she was drowning in public ridicule. But even humiliation wasn't enough to stop her. The next day, I found another letter taped to the cabin door, the paper wrinkled from rain. It read, "You've made powerful enemies. This isn't over." I took a photo, removed it carefully with gloves, and sealed it in a plastic sleeve for evidence. It wasn't rage I felt anymore. It was pity. Watching someone who built their entire identity on power unravel when stripped of it is like watching a house burn that was never structurally sound. By Friday, the state had filed a formal notice of intent to pursue criminal charges. Karen Whitman, president of the Pine Lake Homeowners Association, was officially listed as the respondent in State versus Whitman. I sat in the courthouse lobby with Catherine and Hale as they reviewed the paperwork. Hale closed the file, leaned back, and said, "You ever see a structure implode from the inside? That's what this is. No need to swing a hammer when gravity does the job." When I stepped outside, the air smelled different. Cleaner, lighter, as if the forest itself had exhaled. The weight I'd carried since that first confrontation had finally started to lift. But I knew the fight wasn't over yet. There was still the matter of justice. Not just for me, but for everyone she'd manipulated. That night, as I stood by the water, the moonlight glinting off the lake, I thought about my grandfather again. He used to say, "Truth doesn't shout. It stands there until the noise gets tired." And that's exactly what had happened. Her noise was dying. The truth was still standing. I recorded a final note in my journal. Authority without legitimacy is just theater. She mistook her stage for a courtroom. And somewhere out there, in a mansion full of broken mirrors and unread letters, Karen Whitman was learning the hardest lesson of her life. When you fake power long enough, eventually the real kind shows up with receipts. The day the charges went public, Pine Lake didn't feel like the same town. It wasn't fear that hung in the air anymore. It was revelation. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now stood in clusters near their mailboxes, trading printouts of the county report, like old war veterans comparing scars. The curtain had fallen, and behind it wasn't power or order. It was rot. The kind that spreads when no one checks the foundation. Karen Whitman's foundation had finally cracked wide open. I spent that morning at Catherine Bennett's office downtown. The mood wasn't tense. It was surgical. Files covered her desk, labeled tabs sticking out like scalpel handles. "This is where we take the offensive," she said, sliding a document toward me. "We've already triggered the criminal investigation. Now we open the civil front. Fraud, emotional distress, defamation, property interference, and punitive damages. You're not just defending anymore. You're reclaiming." The paperwork was brutal in its precision. Dates, signatures, transactions, witness statements, and the unbroken chain of proof. Every threat she'd made, every fabricated jurisdictional claim, every extortion payment, now weaponized by the very system she'd pretended to control. "I've also contacted the Federal Housing Integrity Division," Catherine continued. "Once federal funds or interstate communication are involved, and they are because she used online payment systems, the case becomes dual jurisdiction. That means the FBI's white-collar crimes unit gets a look." I stared at her across the desk. "You're saying this goes beyond Pine Lake?" "Oh, it's already gone beyond. Her fraudulent filings with the state registry include wire submissions across state lines. That's enough to justify federal interest. She's about to learn the difference between HOA power and federal law." I signed the paperwork, initials precise and deliberate. As the pen left the final line, it felt like a seal closing. There was no turning back now, not that there ever had been. That afternoon, Hale called with news. Her accounts have been frozen. The county audit team found multiple transfers labeled consulting fees, payments to her personal LLC. She's been laundering community money through a shell entity. The words hit with quiet satisfaction. Not shock, confirmation. Every instinct I'd had was right. She'd turned civic duty into a business, and neighbors into clients she could shake down. "What happens next?" I asked. "The DA files a motion to seize assets pending trial," Hale said. "She's going to lose that mansion across the lake before she ever sees a jury." When I hung up, I went to the window. The lake was calm, glass smooth under the autumn sun. Across the water, Karen's once untouchable home sat dark and silent, the kind of silence that follows a storm when the damage finally settles. That evening, I drove to the community center where it had all started, the place she'd ruled with a clipboard and a microphone. This time it wasn't her voice echoing through the hall. It was the county clerk reading aloud the new court order. Effective. "Immediately, the Pine Lake Homeowners Association shall undergo a full reorganization under state supervision. All prior officers are hereby removed pending audit." Applause broke out. Not loud, not joyous, but steady, like the heartbeat of people rediscovering their own agency. I saw familiar faces in the crowd. Mrs. Patterson clutching her folder of receipts, the Millers standing hand in hand, the Johnsons nodding solemnly. They weren't victims anymore. They were witnesses. Afterward, Mrs. Patterson approached me, tears streaking her weathered face. "We never thought anyone would stand up to her," she said. "We just didn't know how." "You did," I told her. "You just needed someone to remind you that the law doesn't belong to bullies." As I drove home that night, headlights carving through the mist, I realized that revenge wasn't always about retribution. Sometimes it was about restoration, reclaiming what fear had stolen. And Pine Lake was finally taking back its voice. The next morning, Catherine called with the kind of news that feels like the world clicking into alignment. "Federal indictments moving forward," she said. "Mail fraud, wire fraud, obstruction, falsification of public documents, and misappropriation of community funds. The grand jury approved all counts." I didn't say anything for a moment, just let the words hang in the air like the last note of a requiem. "And her attorney?" Klein? He's flipped, Catherine said. He's cooperating. Claims he didn't know about the forged survey but admitted to drafting the fake compliance letters. He's cutting a deal to save his license. So even her lawyer had abandoned ship. That was the final confirmation. The empire had collapsed from within. 2 days later, sheriff's cruisers rolled down the lake road just after sunrise. I stood on the porch as the red and blue lights flickered across the water. Karen's front door opened slowly. She emerged in a white coat, face pale but composed, like she was still trying to control the optics. The deputy spoke quietly, cuffed her hands in front for courtesy, and guided her to the car. For once, no one watched in fear. They watched in vindication. When the news aired that evening, it spread statewide. Local HOA president arrested on fraud and corruption charges. The anchors tried to sound neutral, but there was a hint of disbelief in their tone. Like even they couldn't believe a suburban HOA scandal had turned into a federal case. But those of us who'd lived it knew better. It wasn't about one woman. It was about what happens when small power goes unchecked for too long. The weeks that followed were a blur of filings and testimonies. I spent hours with investigators, going over records, recordings, and evidence. Every meeting peeled back another layer of her deceit. The special projects account she'd created had funneled money not only to herself, but to select board members, who helped her maintain control. Some of it had been disguised as legal retainers, some as maintenance bonuses. It was extortion dressed in polite bookkeeping. During one session, an agent from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit looked up from the file and said, "You know, Mr. Steele, most people fold when someone like her threatens them. What made you push back?" I thought about that for a moment. "Because she picked the wrong man to lie to," I said. "My grandfather taught me that when you build something right, you defend it right. Paperwork, codes, permits, they're not bureaucracy. They're armor." The agent nodded slowly, a faint smile forming. Armor. I like that. By December, Karen's plea deal fell apart. She refused to admit wrongdoing, even as her own lawyer urged her to cooperate. Pride can be a prison stronger than bars. When her case went to trial, the courtroom was full. Residents packed every bench. The air carried the hum of years of suppressed anger finally being given permission to exist. Catherine sat beside me, calm and precise as ever. When the prosecutor displayed the two maps, the legal one and the forged one, the room went silent. The contrast was so blatant that even the judge raised an eyebrow. When the financial statements appeared on the screen, showing money trails leading straight into her account, her attorney stopped objecting altogether. Then came the recordings, the ones from the cabin, where she'd threatened destruction, where she'd called the sheriff under false pretenses, where she'd tried to rewrite the law by sheer arrogance. Hearing her own voice played back under oath was the moment she broke. The posture collapsed, the certainty drained. 3 days later, the verdict came. Guilty on all counts, sentencing to follow. That night, Pine Lake glowed like it hadn't in years. People gathered outside the community center not to celebrate vengeance, but to breathe freely. The monster under the bed had turned out to be human, and she'd finally been caught. A week later, Hale called. She's taking 18 months in federal custody, 2 years probation, full restitution to all affected homeowners. The state's also dissolving the old HOA charter and ordering a reformation vote under new oversight. I hung up and walked out onto the porch. The lake shimmered in the late afternoon light, calm again, as if it had been holding its breath through all of this. Across the water, Karen's house sat dark, windows boarded, real estate sign leaning crooked in the wind. A symbol of what happens when false authority meets real law. I opened the old ammunition box one last time. Inside were the documents that had started it all. The deed, the surveys, the letters from the county dated before she was even born. I placed the verdict summary on top and closed the lid. My grandfather's legacy was safe again, not just physically, but legally, eternally. Later that evening, I attended the first new HOA meeting under state supervision. Mrs. Patterson was elected treasurer unanimously. David Miller took the chair seat. The bylaws were rewritten to require annual elections, open audits, and county oversight for all assessments. Transparency replaced tyranny. When the floor opened for comments, I stood and said, "Authority isn't a badge, it's a contract, and contracts mean nothing without honesty. We don't rebuild by erasing the past, we rebuild by learning from it." The room applauded quietly. No cheers, no speeches, just understanding. Outside the stars were out, the lake smooth as glass again. I could almost hear my grandfather's voice in the wind. "Guard what's yours, but never by fear. Guard it by proof." And that's exactly what we'd done. 3 months later, Pine Lake was almost unrecognizable. The chaos that had once defined every conversation, every letter in the mailbox, every meeting turned argument, was gone. What replaced it wasn't noise. It was calm. Real calm. The kind that sits in your bones and tells you the storm finally passed. The lake reflected a perfect winter sky, clear and endless. For the first time in years, there wasn't a single notice pinned to anyone's door. No threats, no fake fines, no fear. Just quiet. Karen Whitman was behind bars, serving her sentence in a federal facility 2 counties away. Her once impeccable image, the face that had towered over community newsletters and public meetings, was now reduced to a mugshot on page 3 of the Pine County Chronicle. Even the newspaper headline felt poetic. Former HOA president convicted in landmark fraud case. I read it at my kitchen table that morning with coffee steaming beside me and the soft hum of the lake wind pressing against the window. There was no thrill in it, just completion. The kind of closure that feels earned, not celebrated. Because this hadn't been about revenge anymore. It was about truth surviving long enough to be seen. After the trial, the new board had called a meeting at the community center, the same hall where she once ruled through fear. This time, sunlight poured through the tall windows, bright and golden, catching the dust in the air like particles of freedom. Nearly every homeowner showed up, not out of fear, but out of pride. The new leadership table wasn't lined with arrogance or clipped smiles. It was stacked with open binders, laptops, and freshly printed bylaws. Every detail out in the open, every motion voted on transparently. David Miller, now chair, opened the session with the same authority Karen used to pretend she had. But his came from respect, not fear. "We're done with intimidation," he said. "From now on, Pine Lake belongs to everyone who calls it home." The applause that followed wasn't loud. It was steady. It was belief. When it was my turn to speak, I stood and looked out at a sea of faces that had once looked down, afraid to meet anyone's eyes. "My grandfather built my cabin in 1952, I said. "He followed every rule, filed every permit, paid every fee. He believed that when you do things right, you shouldn't have to be afraid of people who fake authority. We let that fear grow too long. But fear only survives in silence. And we're done being silent." A quiet wave of nods spread across the room. Some people had tears in their eyes. Others just looked relieved, like the weight that had crushed them for years was finally lifting. After the meeting, Mrs. Patterson approached me holding a white envelope. "It came this morning," she said, voice trembling. Inside was a check, $19,400, her full restitution plus interest. She pressed it against her chest and whispered, "I can finally rebuild." Others were receiving their refunds too. The Johnsons had already started reconstructing their demolished workshop, this time with full permits approved by the county, no HOA signatures required. The Millers were building a new shed with a greenhouse attached. You could hear laughter again echoing through Pine Lake's streets, the sound of families reclaiming what they'd lost to fear. Karen's house had been sold at auction to a young family with 2 kids who filled the yard with toys and the sound of life. The irony didn't escape anyone. Her fortress of control was now just another home, filled with joy instead of intimidation. One evening, as the sun set low over the lake, I sat on my dock watching the reflection ripple across the water. The air was cold but gentle, the kind that carried memory more than chill. Across the lake, the lights in Karen's former house flickered on, warm, golden, alive. I smiled, not out of spite, but peace. The place that once cast shadows was now part of the light. A few weeks later, Catherine called. "You might want to check your email," she said. "The county commissioner just announced something big." When I opened the message, I saw the headline, "Pine Lake Reform Model to be adopted statewide." The reforms we'd fought for, transparent elections, county oversight, public audits, were being replicated across other HOA communities. What started as one battle over a cabin had become a blueprint for accountability. "Looks like your grandfather's cabin started a movement," Catherine said, half laughing. "He'd like that," I replied. "He always said good paperwork builds good fences." In March, I was invited to speak at a statewide HOA reform summit. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 months earlier, I'd been standing on my porch being threatened for locking my own door. Now I was being introduced as the man who dismantled one of the most corrupt HOAs in the state. When I stepped up to the podium, I didn't talk about Karen. I talked about legacy, about how authority should protect, not exploit, how structure should serve people, not enslave them. And when I mentioned that line, paperworks, the armor of honest men, the room went silent. After the event, a man approached me in uniform. Army, retired. "You remind me of my father," he said. "Fought small wars with big hearts. Glad to see somebody still doing it." We shook hands, and I realized he was right. What we'd done wasn't just legal, it was moral. We'd drawn a line where law met courage and refused to move. By early spring, the community was thriving. The lake thawed, docks were repaired, and kids fished from the same pier my grandfather built 70 years ago. Property values had actually gone up since the Reformation, not because of fear or control, but because stability and transparency attract life. People from nearby counties started moving in, saying they'd heard Pine Lake was different now, a place that learned what leadership really means. One evening, as I walked the trail along the water, I heard the laughter of new voices. Kids chasing each other between trees, their parents chatting by the shoreline. Life had returned, and with it, a sense of balance. When I reached my cabin, the door stood open, the way it always did when I was home. No lock needed anymore. The wood smelled of cedar and salt air. On the wall hung the framed letter from the county surveyor, dated March 10th, 1952. The one that confirmed my grandfather's property rights beyond dispute. Beneath it, I added one more frame. A printed copy of the headline that ended it all. HOA president sentenced in fraud case, Pine Lake community reborn. I didn't hang it for pride. I hung it as proof that the law still works when you have the courage to make it. Sometimes at night, when the wind shifts and carries sound across the water, I still hear echoes of the past. The argument, the sirens, her voice shouting, "Leave, or I'll destroy it." But those words don't sting anymore. They remind me of what came after. The silence that followed. The rebuilding. The rebirth. Because in the end, she didn't destroy anything. she exposed herself, and in doing so, she gave Pine Lake something it hadn't had in decades. Truth. A few days later, I received one last letter. This one from the federal clerk's office. It was a restitution summary, confirming every victim had been repaid in full and the association's records permanently corrected. At the bottom was an official seal, and beneath it, a single line that read, "Case closed." I placed it in the ammunition box, beneath my grandfather's original deed, and closed the lid with the satisfying click of completion. Outside, the sun rose over the lake, scattering gold across the rippling water. The air was cold, crisp, and alive with the scent of pine and morning dew. For the first time in a long time, I felt like the land itself could breathe again. What Karen never understood, and what people like her never do, is that authority is temporary, but integrity outlasts everything. She tried to control a community through fear. I reclaimed it through proof, and proof is forever. I sat on the dock with a fresh cup of coffee, watching the world she'd tried to dominate return to peace. The reflection of the trees shimmered across the lake, and for a moment it felt like time itself had come full circle, back to where it started, with one man, one cabin, and a stack of documents strong enough to outlive corruption. The fight had been long, exhausting, brutal at times, but necessary. Because some legacies aren't built from wealth or power. They're built from truth. And truth, no matter how long it takes, always wins. As the morning sun climbed higher, the light caught the edge of the old ammunition box through the cabin window, casting a glint across the dock. I smiled, knowing it had done its job once again. The same box my grandfather used to protect a cabin now protected an entire community. And maybe that's the real victory. Not that Karen lost, but that we remembered what it means to win the right way.